Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. And if you are new to my channel, you've never seen my face before, never watched any of my videos, but you like true crime content, especially true crime content that's a little bit older, you might want to go down below and hit that subscribe button because that's pretty much all I do here on my channel. And maybe while you're down there, hit that little bell because that'll notify you every time that I upload, and why wouldn't you want that? Today I'm covering a case, technically a double case, that I've wanted to cover for a while on my channel, finally getting around to it. But before I dive into those cases, I gotta say that today's video is sponsored, and it's sponsored by a company I absolutely adore, and that is Hunt a Killer. It is the subscription box for anyone interested in a good murder mystery. Everyone wants to be the one to solve a mystery, and Hunt a Killer lets you do just that. Whatever may interest you in the subject of true crime, whether it's the psychology of the killer who did it, or trying to figure out who did it or how they did it, this subscription box lets you take a dive into that world even more. With every monthly box delivered, you will receive high-quality materials and use all the clues given to you during the series to solve the mystery in the end. Each series is 6 boxes, so for 6 months you will be on your little journey of piecing together everything from maps to handcrafted police reports to looking through high school yearbooks and even audio recordings. You get to be the detective in this storyline and ultimately catch the killer. The subscription service was crafted by some of the biggest true crime lovers, so they know exactly how to keep you on the edge of your seat each month. One of the main things that I love about Hunt a Killer is that, especially now with everything going on in the world, I feel like we are on our phones or the computer or watching TV, watching Netflix, Hulu, whatever. We are doing that constantly. And Hunt a Killer, it keeps your mind going, keeps your mind active, and you're away from electronics. Also, one of the other things I absolutely adore about it is that part of the proceeds for every box go to the Cold Case Foundation to help fund cold case investigations. So while you're solving your own little fictional mystery, you're also helping solve an actual one. If you want to try out Hunt a Killer yourself, you can use the code gabulosis at checkout and get 20% off your first box. Why wouldn't you want to do that, right? So with all that being said, let's get right into the video. The 2 cases that I'm talking about in today's video, they're both connected. Double Jane Doe case. I had heard about these cases about 2 years ago, and the only reason that I put off talking about them until now is because it was still in the midst of going to trial. There hasn't been a solid conclusion to these cases, but at the same time there sort of is a conclusion, and you'll understand what I mean more towards the end of this video. We're going to start this case off on September 28th, 1995, almost 25 years ago. In New Britain, Connecticut, a little after midnight into the 28th, New Britain police officers were on patrol of the area when they were passing by the back of a Connecticut beverage mart on Hartford Road when they spotted a sleeping bag. Why would a sleeping bag be behind a store? It looked like something was inside the sleeping bag, so they decided to get closer to get a better look. It could have been someone without a home who found a spot to sleep behind the local CT beverage mart, but something seemed a bit off. Upon opening up the bag, they discovered the body of a young girl wrapped up in a garbage bag under the sleeping bag, and it was obvious the body had not been there for very long because the body was still warm to the touch. After examining the body, the cause of death was determined to be a single bullet in the head of the victim from a large caliber firearm, a victim who had just recently lost her life. The girl was described as being white or Hispanic. She was said to be between 17 to 20 years of age. She weighed 116 pounds and stood at about 5 feet 3 inches tall. She had brown hair and brown eyes and was wearing a crochet brown and beige pullover shirt and a Union Bay white jacket. She had on white athletic socks with tan LA Gear shoes that were size 6.5. She had her belly button pierced, was wearing a herringbone necklace, a watch, and a ring with a pink stone on the right hand. A $50,000 reward was offered for any information that led to an arrest in her case. It was time to get to work on this case, and it was time to work fast, but authorities had no idea how many years it would take to solve this case, and that this case would eventually be connected to another case. About a week later, another Jane Doe's body would be found, and it would be found about 40 miles away from the previous Does. In early October of 1995, about a week after the first Jane Doe was found, another woman's lifeless body was stumbled upon, this time in western Massachusetts. Troopers at the Russell Barracks reported receiving a phone call around 4:30 p.m. from park rangers of the forest, Tolland State Forest. Tolland State Forest is a popular venue for biking, hiking, hunting, camping, and fishing. Not a place usually known as an area where corpses are disposed of, but that was the unfortunate case that day. The woman was said to be deceased for a little bit over a week, and at this time, it was believed that she was an elderly woman, but this would soon change. And also at this time, District Attorney William Bennett told the public that they didn't know much about this woman, but that they were going to perform an autopsy very soon and find out her cause of death. During that same month of October, authorities released a photo to the public of the sweatshirt the woman was wearing. The sweatshirt was described as being a gray drawstring hoodie with the words "Trends" in a diamond on the left side of the chest, with a red hood, red parts of the sleeves, and a red front pocket pouch. Her cause of death was also a shot to the head. This was very little for the public to go off of, but authorities hoped that releasing a photo of the sweatshirt to the public, that somebody would come forward and recognize it, but nobody really did. In September of 1996, about a year after the body was found, they released a sketch of the individual to the public. The woman was described as being somewhere between 30 years to 45 years old, not elderly like originally thought. She was wearing a maroon trimmed prescription pair of glasses. She also had a full set of teeth, which helped them closer determine what her age was. 14 years later, a little bit of progress was being made when they determined that the Jane Doe found in October of 1995 was believed to be the mother of the Jane Doe found in September of 1995. But still, authorities did not know who these people were, and they had no solid suspects. They actually had no suspects at all. They were able to connect the two Jane Does to each other through DNA testing, but they still didn't have much to go off of in the case. They had released photos to the public and shared extensive details about the two women, but no promising leads came in. They reviewed tons of missing persons cases and none matched either of their does. They looked closer at the items found on the two individuals, and they found a tax stamp on a pack of cigarettes that one of them had on them when they were murdered, and it led them to New York. Also, some items of unique clothing led them to New York as well. This trip to the Big Apple didn't lead them any closer to finding out the two women's identities, though. The case again hit a dead end. They were also able to get a palm print, almost a perfect palm print, from the garbage bag that was wrapped around the first Jane Doe, the teenager. But they had this palm print on file and they ran it through their database and they found no matches. And of course, because they didn't know these two Jane Doe's identities, they were unable to compare the palm print to anybody who knew the Jane Does. 19 years after the discovery of these two bodies, a family in Brewster, New York, notified the New York State Police, and they wanted to file a police report for two of their loved ones. Two loved ones who they had not heard from since 1995. Fall of 1995 to be exact. Investigators from New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut all came together to compare all of their separate information when it came to these cases. After days of interviewing relatives and collecting DNA from these relatives to compare to the Jane Does to see if they were actually related, everything just started coming together. The DNA comparisons were a match. The concerned relatives of these two loved ones who went missing in 1995 were in fact the relatives of the Jane Does. The two Jane Does got their names back. They were 17-year-old Elizabeth Haunch and her mother, 53-year-old Marcia Haunch, who both originally lived in New York. As soon as the identities of these victims was known and the family knew that the two Jane Does were in fact Marcia Haunch and Elizabeth Haunch, they started thinking, who could have been responsible? It didn't take them long to come up with an answer, and they all agreed that the person that they were leaning towards for being responsible for this double murder case was Robert Haunch. Robert Haunch was the husband of Marcia and the biological father of Elizabeth. In the late 1970s, Marcia met Robert while she was working at a diner in the Bronx in New York. Not long after, Robert moved in with Marcia and her children, and in 1979, Elizabeth was born. Eventually, Marcia, Robert, and Elizabeth moved to Brewster, New York. Marcia had left her 3 other daughters behind in the Bronx. Robert had made all of the daughters basically leave the home as soon as they turned 16. Brewster is a small village in the town of Putnam County, not far from the border of Connecticut. According to Marcia's other children, growing up in the home with Robert, there was a lot of violence on the regular. Robert was mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive. He was abusive towards pretty much everybody in the household, but he took out most of his anger on Marcia, and her children recall one specific event that really scarred them growing up, and it was right after Marcia had a very intense argument with Robert. She flew out of the bedroom and she was just dripping blood down her face. Marcia's daughter Sheila was quoted saying, "He used to hit my mother often and even choked my little sister on the bathroom floor when she was only 13 years old. These small examples are nothing compared to the full extent of the torture and evil my mother and we 4 girls suffered year after year." The thing is that Marcia and Elizabeth actually got away from Robert for a large period of time. It was from about 1988 to 1995, which is a pretty big span of time. It was about 8 full years. The only reason that Marcia ended up getting back with Robert is a very sad and unfortunate reason, and that is that her mental health was deteriorating. She was very mentally ill and she needed somebody to take care of her, and Robert said that he would. In September of 1995, Marcia saw family members and explained her new living situation with them, saying she was back with her estranged husband and she and Elizabeth would be living with him again. Her family knew of his past abuse and did not want this to happen again, but what were they supposed to do? The family said that during this meeting, it was obvious that Marcia was on something. She seemed drugged in some way. Robert was known as very manipulative, angry, and controlling. Her family members had a very bad feeling about this situation. About 2 months later, Robert showed up to these family members' home again, and it was very odd. He seemed on edge and was looking disheveled. He told the family that he recently got a job all the way on the other side of the world in Australia, and said that Marcia and Elizabeth were already over there waiting for him. This seemed very unlikely to the family members, and they spent years trying to contact Marcia and Elizabeth, but were never able to get a hold of them, not knowing that over a month before, Robert told them this false news that he had actually taken both their lives. A relative of the family with connections to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement looked into this claim from Robert that he was going to Australia, and they found out that he never left the country. So if he wasn't in Australia, he never left the United States. Where was he? Well, it was back in 2006 that Robert popped up on a timeline. We don't really know what happened from 1995 to 2006, but 2006, we know he had started a new life. In 2006, Robert's wife at the time, a woman named Cheryl, whose last name he took, Cheryl reached out to Robert's brother and sister-in-law because she was concerned about Robert's past. Robert had told her that both his parents were deceased, that he never was previously married or had any children, but that he had family in Ohio. This was suspicious to Cheryl. She told them that she had met Robert in Louisiana, and he told her that he recently got back from Africa, and that he was a truck driver at the time. The two dated for a bit and then got married around 3 months after dating. Robert's relatives and her kept in contact for years, and eventually Robert's relatives let her know about Marcia and Elizabeth. They sent Cheryl some photos of them. Cheryl showed Robert the photos of Marcia and Elizabeth, and Robert claimed he didn't know them. In the year 2013, one of Robert's relatives asked Robert directly, "What happened to your wife and your daughter?" And Robert said, and this is something I've seen so much in true crime cases when it comes to a significant other, he said that Marcia had run away with a man and taken Elizabeth with her. He claimed he didn't know where they were. This relative didn't believe this for a second. So this relative pried a little bit deeper and asked again, like, what happened to them? And Robert used the oldest trick in the book. He claimed he had amnesia. But a year later in 2014, when all of the little puzzle pieces were finally connected, everything would come crashing down on Robert Haunch. One time though, Cheryl asked relatives of Robert if they thought he could possibly hurt Marcia or Elizabeth, and they said yes. In the year 2014, investigators from Massachusetts and Connecticut drove all the way to Ohio to interview Robert in person. Ohio is where Robert had been living for many years now. When authorities spoke to Robert, he was still pushing the story of amnesia, claiming that something could have happened, but he doesn't really remember much, and he definitely doesn't remember much from the year 1995. They decided to bring out a photo of his daughter's body. He looked at it, looked at them, and said he didn't know how she got that way. While they were questioning him, they were able to obtain a hair sample from him and a palm print, which they compared directly to the palm print found on the garbage bag. The test came back, and it was in fact a match. Robert was arrested for the murders of his wife Marcia Haunch and his daughter Elizabeth Haunch. At this time, he was a skinny old man in his early 70s. Marcia's daughter Sheila said although he seemed like a seemingly mild-mannered man in person, he was a monster with no feelings and a hatred for women, whose actions affected more than 50 family members. She said in court, "Your Honor, for the love of God, I respectfully ask that this court put a stop to this madman and make it impossible for Robert Haunch to ever destroy the future of anyone ever again." She said he was always the key to the two's disappearance, and the family knew it for all those years. She went on to say, "My sisters and I spent our days wondering what on earth could be keeping our mother and little sister away from us, and spent our nights in quiet tears so as to not alarm our husbands and our children. So many years and years of torment and heartache." This family of Marcia and Elizabeth was tortured mentally for so many years, and the only thing that they wanted at this point, because you know they couldn't get Marcia or Elizabeth back, they just wanted Robert to admit what he did. But of course, he pleaded not guilty in court.
"I expect the evidence will show that the defendant drove to Tallinn, Massachusetts, an area that his older daughter, Celeste Murillo, from a different relationship, will tell you is an area that the defendant was familiar with, an area that the defendant had been to many times before, and an area where the defendant camped with Celeste and Elizabeth on a number of occasions."
The first trial was for the murder of his wife, Marcia Haunch, and it was held in Massachusetts. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and received life in prison. When it comes to this case, the last report that I can find online is one from February 2019 that stated Robert was going to stand trial for his daughter's case as well. At 74 years of age, he rejected a plea deal that offered him 25 years in prison for her murder, and he rejected it, saying he wanted to stand trial for the case instead, thinking maybe he would get a lesser sentence if they found him not guilty. If he is found guilty for her murder, he would receive 60 years on top of him already having a life sentence for Marsha's murder.
A man serving a life sentence for the murder of his wife has rejected a plea deal in connection with the death of his daughter. 74-year-old Robert Hodge said he wants to go to trial for the 1995 murder of his 17-year-old daughter, Elizabeth.
When it comes to this case, like I just stated, the last report that I could find regarding Robert Hodge and his trials was one from February of 2019, when he was still set to go to trial for the murder of Elizabeth Hodge.
In court, Hodge was silent and emotionless, at times not making any eye contact at all, at other times staring right into the camera.
I'm not entirely sure about where that case stands. I can't tell you if he eventually went to court for it or if his court hearing is very soon, but overall there is a basic conclusion to these cases, and that is that Robert Hodge has life in prison, and he is in his 70s, so the chances of him ever seeing the light of day are slim to none. This case is very bittersweet because on one hand you have to be very thankful that Robert is finally behind bars, but on the other hand, this is somebody who spent too many years after the crime being completely free and allowed to do whatever he pleased. This is somebody who should have been behind bars over 2 decades ago. They spent 19 years completely free after taking the lives of 2 innocent people. According to MassLive.com, Hampden District Attorney Anthony D. Golini said, "My sympathy remains with Marsha and Elizabeth's family. However, I hope this verdict brings them some closure to this long process of criminal justice, and a feeling that, indeed, justice has been served. I would like to thank the many law enforcement agencies involved for their incredible steadfastness and commitment to justice through this very lengthy and, at times, frustrating investigation." From everything that I read online about Robert Hodge, he was a horrible human being. I mean, down to the very core of who he was as a person. Even if you take the murders out of it, he is a repulsive human being. According to Marsha's daughters in court, he is an evil, evil man filled with so much hatred. It is absolutely sickening. And not only hatred towards women, because that's obviously what he had inside of him, was this burning hatred for anybody who was a woman. He also had a hatred for anybody who was not of his background. There are so many claims from people saying that on many different occasions, he would talk negatively, and I mean very negatively, about Marsha's background, which was Puerto Rican. Marsha was a woman who was not in the right mindset. She loved her children dearly, but she needed help, and there was nobody she really knew to turn to. She didn't want to feel like she was taking advantage of anybody. She didn't really go to family members. She went back to Robert. Marsha just overall wanted security, and the fact that they had gotten back together in August of 1995 and he took their lives in late September of 1995, that's only a month later. I think that this is something he had definitely planned. It is so heartbreaking to me to think that Marsha was getting back with somebody that she thought would give her security, and it was the complete opposite. This was a double Jane Doe case that was ultimately solved, and that is very rare. A lot of the time when it comes to a Jane or John Doe case, their identities may be discovered, but finding out who was responsible, that can take years. And the fact that as soon as family was made aware that these 2 individuals were their relatives, Marsha and Elizabeth, They knew who was responsible. So that is all of the information that I have for you all when it comes to the case of Elizabeth Haunch and her mother, Marcia Haunch, and the case of murderer Robert Haunch. Like I said at the beginning of this video, it's a case that I didn't really want to cover until there was a full conclusion. I couldn't find any information about whether he has gone to trial for Elizabeth's murder or not. I didn't want to cover this case until there was a full conviction for both of the murders. But overall, we know that Robert is not going to be out of prison anytime soon, and we need a conviction in Elizabeth's case for sure, but that is ultimately what matters, is that he's going to be behind bars for the rest of his life. Of course, overall, we're all wanting full justice to be served in both Marcia's case and Elizabeth's case, and for Robert to be found guilty and for him to sit in prison and think about what he did, even though he has amnesia and can't remember 1995 or before then. But that is just one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to true crime cases, is somebody claiming that they just coincidentally can't remember a year where they took somebody's life. Like, oh, I remember everything except 1953. Like, that's a little fuzzy. Oh, what did I do? Oh, really? I don't remember that. I mean, it's like the bare minimum you could do is just tell them what led up to it happening, why it happened, and in some cases, you know, where the person's remains could be found. There's so many people behind bars for taking the lives of an individual who is missing and we don't know where they're located. It's just, give the family at least that. I know I'm like ranting at this point, but it is 3 a.m. and I have so much to say, and I've been diving into this case for a week now, and I'm just like angry. Of course, like always, let me know your opinions about today's case down below in the comments, and while you're down there in the comments, if you're going to comment anything at all, remember to send a little bit of love to this family, the family of Marcia and Elizabeth, because you never know who could possibly come across this video. And remember that today's video is sponsored by Hunt a Killer. Thank you, Hunt a Killer, for sponsoring today's video and sponsoring so many videos from awesome creators all around the platform. And with all that said, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.